Hey there, welcome back to Sinosphere. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov is back to the continent of Africa with a vengeance. Barely 6 months after his first African tour, 2 more trips are in the offing. To call it a new scramble for Africa, as some like to do, is clearly hyperbolic. Nonetheless, it can't be denied that the Western powers are energetically trying to woo Africa as relations with many of their rivals, including Russia and China, continue to deteriorate. China's new Foreign Minister Qin Gang got off to an early start, visiting Ethiopia, Gabon, Angola, Benin and Egypt just a few weeks ago. Now, the United States, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is also set to embark on a tour to Senegal, Zambia and South Africa. And as of today, Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov is visiting South Africa at the start of a planned second African tour since the conflict in Ukraine started in February 2022. Moscow is evidently trying to use these trips to show the collective West that they aren't isolated among the global South countries as the Western media claims. On his July 2022 trip, Lavrov visited Egypt, Congo-Brazzaville, Uganda, and Ethiopia, also meeting the African Union, AU leadership in Addis Ababa. It is now also being reported that South Africa will next month go ahead with naval exercises off its eastern coast with Russian and Chinese warships in a decision that could further strain its relationship with some of its biggest trading partners in the West. The US, Germany, Japan, and the UK are leading trading partners for South Africa, while Russia isn't in the top 15. Operation Mosi, which means smoke, will take place from February 17th until the 26th. South Africa's reluctance to condemn Russia and its decision to allow Western-sanctioned Russian vessels to dock at its ports have already ramped up tensions with the US, UK, and European Union, who are together backing Ukraine in the conflict. The Qin and Lavrov trips could be seen as swift responses to US President Joe Biden's Africa summit in December, which appeared to be a photo op even though it certainly pulled a big crowd of leaders. Though it hasn't yet been officially announced, Lavrov will visit Eswatini, Botswana, and Angola after South Africa. He will then return to North Africa in February to visit Tunisia, Mauritania, Algeria, and Morocco. That would amount to 12 countries plus the EU in just over 6 months, an impressive diplomatic charm offensive on Africa. Yet in a marathon 3-hour press conference in Moscow on 18 January, covering the world but mostly Ukraine, Lavrov didn't mention an African tour. In fact, Africa only came into the picture in the very last question of the conference. A Russian journalist asked him to comment on a Sputnik TV's interview with South African International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor. In it, Pandor had demanded, not for the first time, the withdrawal of the Countering Malign Russian Activities in Africa bill adopted by the U.S. House of Representatives in 2022. It would impose sanctions on Russian entities like the Wagner private military company, deemed by the collective West to be conducting malign activities on the continent. It could also lead to U.S. sanctions on African governments and businesses dealing with such Russian entities. U.S. Senate sources believe the legislation was a misguided overreaction by the House to the conflict in Ukraine, and that the more sober-minded Senate wouldn't even bother to take it up. Nonetheless, it is remarkable how much negative influence the bill is having on America's relations with Africa. The bill plays directly into Russia and Lavrov's narrative about America's patronizing attitude toward Africa. This is the colonial paradigm par excellence, Lavrov said on Wednesday. He recalled how former U.S. President Donald Trump's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had told African states in February 2020 that they should stop trading with Russia and China because these two countries were serving their own interests and damaging Africa's. He revealed that much of the second Russia-Africa summit, which his government would host in St. Petersburg late in July 2023, would be devoted to finding ways for Russia and Africa to sidestep such unilateral U.S. sanctions. We are preparing documents on fine-tuning our interaction mechanisms to the new conditions that involve sanctions, he said. This would entail adjusting investment and trade tools and supply chains. Most of all, Lavrov said, we are shifting to settlements in national currencies rather than the US dollar. These changes would not happen overnight, but they were underway. The implications of Lavrov's remarks were quite far-reaching, as something similar is already underway in the BRICS alliance, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa bloc of emerging nations. The bloc has already begun granting loans to member states from its new development bank and conducting trade in its own currencies rather than the greenback. So it's not surprising that South Africa already seems on board with this project. Pandor told Sputnik that we have always been concerned that there is a dominance of the dollar and that we do need to look at alternatives. I think this was one of the reasons we created the new development bank of BRICS. The systems currently in place tend to privilege really wealthy countries and tend to be really a challenge for countries such as ourselves, which have to make payments in dollars, which cost much more in terms of our various currencies. So I do think a fairer system has to be developed. She added that BRICS economic ministers were discussing this. While the exercise follows a similar event in 2019, it comes about a year after the conflict in Ukraine escalated into an all-out war, an event that seems to have brought into the open South Africa's close ties with Russia due to historical support for the African country's liberation struggle against colonialism and their joint membership of the BRICS group of nations. Well, there you have it, folks. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.